Ciao amici! Today, our group is going to be discussing how over the past decade, many of Italy's fine wine regions have undergone a stylistic shift, arguably becoming more traditional in style. Each member of our group will cover a region in the Northeast, Northwest, Central, and Southern Italy, discussing what the overall stylistic changes have been. We'll also be discussing some viticultural and winemaking techniques that have been used, and we'll each cover an example of a producer whose style has changed, exemplifying this shift towards becoming more traditional. So without further ado, let's begin.
I have chosen to discuss the Barolo DOCG in northwestern Italy. In the 80s and 90s, the Barolo boys were a group that introduced and made popular many new techniques for winemaking, a modernization, if we may. Such as using smaller wood, barrique, shorter macerations, all with the goal to make a wine that was easier to drink in less time. I would argue that the Barolo region in Piemonte has seen a shift towards a more traditional style over the past decade or so, though. An example of this shift in the winery towards tradition would be using larger oak opposed to small barrique, extending macerations opposed to using shorter macerations, and as well as the introduction or the return to using the natural yeasts from the vineyard in fermentation. An example of a producer, in my opinion, whose style has changed in the past decade towards being more traditional would be Giacomo Finocchio. He has gone from using barrique to using larger oak casks. He has extended his maceration times, and as well, he has gone back to using the traditional native yeasts in his fermentations. Thank you.
When we think Italian white wine, Pinot Grigio is the first thing that comes to mind, and with good reason. Italy is the world's largest producer of Pinot Grigio, with the majority grown in the northeast of the country, spanning Friuli Venezia Giulia, Veneto, and Trentino Alto Adige. This is where a lot of producers have chosen to relive the traditional way of making Pinot Grigio in a style called Ramato. Ramato, which means copper in Italian, is the oldest method of making white wine, dating back 2,000 years to the city of Friuli, where winemakers would create their white wine by keeping the skins on during fermentation, the same way that red wine is made today. This extended maceration period allows the wine to develop deep and more complex flavors, higher tannins, and a beautiful copper color, as you can see. The recent updates in the Delle Venezie DOC regulations acknowledges the historic significance of Ramato, and a lot of producers are making exceptional versions of it. I found this Pinot Grigio Ramato from Hacienda Agricola Perusini, a historical winery based in the Friuli Colli Orientali DOC. It has notes of strawberry, tropical fruits, spices, and herbs, with lively acidity on the finish. Salute!
Regarding Central Italy, I'll be discussing Montepulciano d'Abruzzo DOC. Montepulciano d'Abruzzo has always been perceived as an inexpensive bulk wine region, with more of a quantity-focused versus quality-focused product. Today, Abruzzese winemakers are trying to gain a new reputation when it comes to Montepulciano. Producers like Amidio Pepe or Valentini have been amongst the first to pioneer the idea that Montepulciano is a high-quality grape and can produce wines of structure and finesse, as well as wines with long aging capabilities. In the vineyards, there's been a focus on clay soils found inland in the Apennine mountainous terrain, knowing that Montepulciano thrives there. In the cellar, producers are using a significant amount of various sized oak aging, resulting in different expressions of this varietal. La Valentina is amongst this Montepulciano movement. The spelt Montepulciano d'Abruzzo represents a fuller-bodied version of this traditional wine. It's made with the first selection of Montepulciano grapes from the vineyards. In addition, all of the wines for spelt are aged in wood for a total of 18 months. The result is a more robust and complex wine, and the name spelt refers to a type of wheat that once grew where the La Valentina winery and village of Spoltore, whose name itself derives from spelt, are now located. Cheers!
Over the last 10 years, the Etna DOC has become extremely popular as people have shown more of an interest in volcanic wines. The Nerello Mascalese-based Rosos and the Caricante-based Biancos have showcased the potential of the region producing wines that rival Burgundy. Speaking of Burgundy, it is one of the few wine regions where the white wines present just as much finesse and complexity as the reds. The Etna DOC is doing just that. They are closing the gap between red and white. The Etna Biancos have undergone a stylistic change where winemakers are taking more interest in the grape. They're experimenting with different techniques to produce a Caricante that goes beyond light and crisp to a wine that has the potential to age and develop complex aromas and flavors. For example, Ciro Biondi, a winemaker whose vineyard sits on the southeastern foot of Etna, has pioneered this change in style. He created an Etna Bianco that goes by the name of Pinata. The grapes for this wine are harvested on a small 2.5 hectare plot of a steep terraced crater. Ciro started experimenting with this new style in 2011, and it took him about 4 years to produce something he thought could rival the wines he tasted in Burgundy. Biondi keeps the grapes on their skins for 24 hours, then placed in stainless steel. The wine is then fermented and aged in large neutral oak barrels, with batonnage taking place once a week. When I visited Ciro in Sicily this past summer, the wine was unlike anything I had tasted. I tried both a younger vintage and an aged vintage, and the wine had developed into a complex white with notes of yellow flowers, apricot, and herbs. Other winemakers of the region have taken notice of this new approach and have also began incorporating more oak aging, experimenting with different types of wood, or even taking a more natural approach to their Etna Biancos. I think in the future, we will see a lot more fuller-bodied, complex Etna Biancos that can sit in your cellar for much longer than you